name is Sandy. I'm one of the pastors that gets to be just one of the guys this weekend. And it is my personal pleasure to introduce to you our speaker, Bill Hull, not Bill Hulse. Bill Hulse wrote the book, Peyote is My Friend. That's not the guy. Bill Hull, H-U-L-L, has been a pastor for some 20 years. He's an author, a speaker internationally. Kind of has one topic, that Jesus' last words to us, go and make disciples. What the heck is a disciple? How do you make one? That's what Bill Hull's about. Give a warm welcome to my friend.
Good evening. I hope I have this thing on.
Yeah.
Correctly. It's great to be here at 7,000 feet. I hope we all survive. You've already heard the bear management program, the mountain lion management program, and so I expect a police escort to my room tonight. I've known Sandy for quite a long time. We've known each other so long that we used to go running together. Running is something that doesn't enter into my life any longer. I walk very fast, very geeky. Kids in my neighborhood think I'm from Geekistan. But it's a joy to be with you and to talk with you this weekend about what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And I think that essentially I want to talk about, in some different ways, of what it means to follow him in this way. A follower of Jesus, a disciple, is learning to live our lives as though Jesus were living it. If he were a plumber, what kind of plumber would he be? A good one, I hope. If he were an electrician, I would expect that when he came to my house, that when I flipped on the garbage disposal, my garage door wouldn't go up. I would expect him to be very competent and very good. And so what kind of parent would Jesus be? A spouse or a businessman? And that's really what we want to talk about this weekend. Tonight, what I want to focus on is more personal. And I've entitled what I want to say tonight as Bill Hull. I don't know what it says up here, but I'm almost as tall as this thing, aren't I? But Bill Hull. Now, it will make sense in a moment. I was born in the city of Indianapolis, Indiana, and I lived and brought up at 4929 Kingsley Drive before there were zip codes or color television. In fact, before television. We had one, but not as soon as some of the other people in our community. And at an early age, it was obvious that I was taller than my comrades, the other kids in the neighborhood. And so I grew, and I kept growing, and I kept growing. But I was also somewhat of a mystery to my mother and to my grandparents, because I suppose in the 5th grade this would summarize it. I came home one day, and I laid my report card down on the table, and it had 5 F's on it. 5 F's. And I said, well, Mom, is it heredity or environment? I wish I would have been that intelligent. I could have said that. In the 7th grade, they kept passing me along because they really didn't know what to do with me. At the 7th grade, Mrs. Johnson, our homeroom teacher and also science teacher, said, when I call your name, I'd like for you to walk across the room and stand against the wall, and that means you've passed into the next level of the 7th grade. So one by one, students' names were called. They went over and stood against the wall until there was just 2 of us left on the wrong side of the room. Me and Kitty Bohannon. Now, Kenny Bohannon was a hood. If you've seen Grease, you know a little bit about that. The duck tail back there, the grease on the hair. He had, after school, when he was allowed to, he actually had a t-shirt. He'd roll up his Camel cigarettes. And the kid was 12. Everybody expected that Kenny Bohannon would flunk the 7th grade. But me? Come on. So they decided to have me go to the high school a semester late. And when I enrolled in the high school, they said, now we have a program for 4.5 years, or we have a program for 3.5 years. Being a perceptive young man, I said, I'll take the 4.5 years. My first 4 semesters of high school, I took English 1 the first semester 4 times. Until they finally put me in a class with 3 other people. And they said, the first month we're going to talk about nouns. And next month we'll talk about verbs. And they started diagramming sentences, and someplace there were all these off-ramps and everything. I was really very confused. But I kept growing. And I happened to be the best basketball player in my class, except I was academically ineligible. And my sophomore year, I actually became academically eligible. Barely. And so I was on the junior varsity. I had a girlfriend named Linda. Linda and I were in love. Our combined age was 30. And I had a basketball coach named Gene Ring. He was the varsity coach, and he had his eye on me. And he said that you're going to be a good player here, kid, but you're going to have to play on the junior varsity first. And so at the this was in Indianapolis, Indiana, on the junior varsity team, another member of our junior varsity team was David Letterman, the comedian. So that we were both in the same class at the same time, on the same high school basketball team. David never played, but he was our funniest player. And so the coach at state tournament time, he included the junior varsity and the freshmen and everybody, and he had a talk about the state tournament there in Indiana. And he said, okay, boys, now this is the way Gene Ring talked. He said, boys, now let me tell you something. We're going to have this situation here. And it's a state tournament time. And I want you to take those school books. I want you to throw them out the window. No problem there. And he said the second thing is no skirts. No skirts. And so that meant during state tournament time, no dating. But Lynn and I were in love. You can't restrain love. So we were walking down the hallway one day holding hands. And Ring came out of the gymnasium and he saw me. He said, come here, boy, come here. And he took me back into the janitor's closet and he slammed me up against the wall. And he said, listen, boy, listen. Now, I told you no skirts. Now break up with it, break up with it. So I did. He was not to be trifled with. He was a frightening man. But he believed him. And he turned me, a classic underachiever, into a classic overachiever. And by the time I was a senior and I graduated from high school, by the way, I went to a prep high school, so we had 413 graduating seniors, and they would list you on the bulletin board, your academic standing. 411, that was me. 412, there was Kenny Bohannon. And so I went to college to play basketball. When I arrived at college, though, I was quite frightened about academics. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to get through college. I think I was a little bit about like some of you might be. There's a skill you have. It's something that identifies who you are. And you're very competent at it. You're confident. It's how you earn a living. It's where you get a lot of the kudos in your life. Does somebody ask you to represent Christ in a conversation with your neighbor, or to do some kind of step of leadership, something that's out of your comfort zone, you might feel not that confident. Because maybe you've tried something, didn't work out so well. Or you've just been so busy in your life, you've never been able to do some of the things or learn some of the things that you really have always wanted to. You might be like our little friend Moses. I shouldn't have said little, but Moses. There, is Moses? No, that's me. Is that Moses? Yeah, there we go. I've actually seen the statue now. You can see he's kind of horny here, but that's a whole other issue. Now, Moses was a felon. He had committed a murder. And he had to flee into the Negev. The Negev is like a lot of Arizona without the plumbing. Miles and miles and miles of kitty litter. So, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that about Arizona. And so, Moses is on the backside of the Negev. And he's been out there for 40 years. He thinks that God is finished with him. He is, as we open this passage tonight, in Exodus chapter 3, verse 1, and the text will be up on the screen for you. One day Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. Let's just stop there. He's 80 years old, and he's working for his father-in-law. One wonders how old Jethro was. But here he is. It's not even his own flock. He's 80, and he has no real flock of his own. It's like rent-a-flock. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came to Sinai, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of the bush. Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. This is amazing, Moses said to himself. Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go see him. When the Lord saw Moses come to him, take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush, Moses, Moses. Here I am, Moses replied. Do not come any closer. So here he is. He's a person who thinks that God is no longer going to talk to him. He's very surprised. He's shocked. He doesn't really know what to say. But so God reintroduces himself. He says, take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. When Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. He was ashamed. Then the Lord told him, and what God tells him in the next few verses is, I've heard the cry of my people. It's been 400 years And we get really impatient with God in our prayers. We wonder how come He hasn't done what we want Him to do in the time frame that we think He should be doing it. This is 400 years. By my calculations, that's 1613. If we go back 400 years. That's a long time ago. That's how long it's been. And God says, now I'm going to answer. I'm going to act. In fact, I'm going to send you, Moses. You. You're going to go to the Pharaoh. You're going to tell him it's time to let them go. You're going to go get the elders. You're going to go see Pharaoh. And this is your assignment. That's new life for Moses. I mean, think about it. He's going to have another chance, and not just any chance. He's going to be the point man for the most important act of God in 400 years with His own people. This is something that he can't really believe it almost. But he's thrilled. He has to be thrilled. But it's been so long since something really positive has happened in this way that he has some things he wants to ask God first. He's not very confident. So the first thing he says is, I'm not qualified. And if you look at verses 11 and 12, but Moses protested God. Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? God answered, I will be with you, and this is your sign. And I am the one who has sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain. Now, I went to junior college for 2 years. I had a lot of basketball scholarship offers out of high school, but they said, first you finished 411th. So you need to go off to Oklahoma, wherever that might be, and play basketball there for 1 year and get your grades up, and then you can come back to Indiana or other schools that you want to go to. And so I went out to Oklahoma. I liked it. We were playing 30-some games a year in tournaments and trophies, and that seemed to be better than playing freshman basketball at some university where you did play 10 games. There wasn't one and done in those days. There was just the freshman year, 10 games. And you can't play on the varsity. Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, when he was at UCLA as a freshman, he was the same year as me. The freshman team beat the varsity at UCLA by 35 points in the freshman varsity game. So Alcindor, if he could have played when he was a freshman, UCLA would have won 4. He would have won 4 national titles and would have been MVP in the whole country 4 years in a row. I don't think anybody's dominated college basketball like he did. So I end up, after my 2 years at the college, of choosing Oral Roberts University. Now this was shocking to a lot of people, including me. But I chose Oral Roberts University, and I became a Christian after about 3 months. And in the spring, we were having a student revival. And there were about 800 to 1,000 students in the room. And they came to the end of the service, and they were praying for students, and people were helping one another in many different ways. And then they had, if anybody wanted to say anything, they could. And I was sitting toward the back, and I really wanted to stand up and say, oh, by the way, I'm a Christian. But I just couldn't do it. And so the chaplain of the university said, okay, let's close in prayer. And he bowed his head. And then he stopped. Bill Hall, do you have something to say? I said, yes. So I went up in front, And I said something about, I'm a Christian. You might not think I am, but I am. And at that very moment, Oral Roberts, now some of you are too young to remember Oral Roberts, but he was as famous as Billy Graham back in the old days. And he was on television, and he was an evangelist, and about 6'3", quite a personality. And I saw him coming, bounding up toward me. And I thought, oh no, what have I done? But he had said, Bill, this is fantastic. And so I was really the first player that played that ever stood up at ORU and said, I'm a Christian. Because it was one of their evangelistic approaches, is to recruit a basketball team, then lead them to Christ. That's kind of the approach. And so he said, Bill, what are you going to do? I said, well, I think I'm going to have a Bible study in my room. I didn't know what to say. I just said, I'll have a Bible study. So I had a Bible study in my room, and the next night we were having another meeting, and it was a large group of people, and right in the middle of this, we got the speaker that night, Don Shell, one of the guys on our team, about 6'9", red hair, Seminole, Oklahoma. Don stands up and he says, you know what? If it's good enough for Bill, it's good enough for me. And he ran down front, and we all ran down there and got together, because we were very competitive. We got down in front, and several of the team became followers of Jesus that night. So now I have a crew. I have no clue what to do. Now I thought what would happen as soon as you become a Christian, here's what happens. God does two things. The first one, he sends you to Africa as a missionary. Second, he makes you marry a woman bigger than you. This is a men's retreat. And so it's a couple of days later, and I'm in the cafeteria with Jane, my fiance, and now wife of 44 years. And so, here comes Oral Roberts. And he says, Bill, come here a minute. I run over there. He says, Bill, I've been praying about it. I've decided to have you go with me to Africa. So, I said, me? Who am I? I'm just like Moses in this case. Who am I that I would go to Africa? There are students. There's like 100 students who have applied for this. They're preachers and singers, and they have talent. And he says, oh, I want you, Bill, to go as a member of the athletic department, to represent our athletes. So I didn't even apply, and I find myself in Africa. And so, being qualified, none of us are qualified, all right? I wasn't qualified, and I show up in Nairobi. And the first night, they introduced me to 100,000 people to give my testimony. And they introduced me as the greatest college basketball player in America. And you thought I was Bill Hulse. But what actually, my apologies to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So there I was. Like Moses, maybe like you get called to do something and you don't feel qualified. But God says, look, I'll be with you. Go ahead. Go ahead and do it. So now Moses, I suppose after God says, look, I'm going to be with you. That should be enough. He'd be ready. But apparently not, because the second thing he says is, what proof do I have? Now, some of us are very practical, pragmatic people. But if you look at this, chapter 3, he says, verse 13, but Moses protested, if I go to the people of Israel and tell them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they will ask me, what is his name? Then what should I tell them? Now this next statement is why I have observed that God isn't necessarily that good at answering our questions. Because he says, tell them I am who I am. Oh, really? Say to the people of Israel, I am who sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. Oftentimes we want a sign from God. But today, we were driving up here from Phoenix, like all of you, and as we were driving up here, there were many signs that we passed. Not once did Sandy pull off to the side of the road and sit under the sign and say, we've arrived. The sign was pointing to something else. And so he's asking for a sign. Give me a sign. But see, proof is not the problem. Because he tells him in verses 14 and following, and I'm not going to take time to read that entire passage, but in that passage, he essentially says it's going to be a route. I am going to send you there, and I'm going to give you power, and I'm going to, the people of Israel are going to be free. The Pharaoh must let you go because I'll put so much pressure on him that he'll absolutely do it. And also, in addition to that, he even says every Israelite woman will ask for articles of silver and gold and fine clothing from her Egyptian neighbors and from the foreign women in their houses. You will dress your sons and daughters with these, stripping the Egyptians of their wealth. This is going to be a total, complete victory. But then Moses says, what if they don't believe me? The persecuted church around the world, they fear the raised iron fist. The church in America, we fear the raised eyebrow. Might we look foolish? Might we be called a bigot? Might we be told that we're people who have phobias? We're afraid of a variety of kinds of conduct and behavior. We have to decide. Are we going to be marginalized? Are we going to stand? And in this case, God asked Moses an important question. He says, Moses, what is that you have in your hand? Beginning of chapter 4. What if they don't believe or listen to me? What if they say the Lord never appeared to you? You're a kook. You're someone who can't be relied on. Aren't you that guy aren't you wanted by the law? Why should we believe you? What have you been doing the last 40 years? Working for your father-in-law? That's not really a great credential. You're not qualified. You're not competent. Moses said, well, Lord, that's a shepherd's staff I have in my hand. Okay. Throw it on the ground. What sense does that make? But throw it on the ground. And it became a serpent, a snake. And what did Moses do? He did the very normal thing. He jumped back. He fled from it. And then God says, pick it up. Pick it up. Go ahead. And he picked it up, and of course it became a staff. Now, here I am in Africa. And after I spent the first week being the most famous basketball player in America, the second week, Star Debbie and I were assigned, two young ladies, and I were assigned to go out with this African pastor who was about 5'3", and he had a Bible that was like 6 feet tall. I mean, I never forget the huge red Bible this guy carried around. And so one day we went out to a village. And he said, now you go over there and stand in the field, and you sing your Swahili songs that you've memorized, and I'll get some people to come over. And so we did. After about 15 minutes, about 65 or 70 people came over and stood in this field with us. And so he turned to the girls and said, who's going to preach? And they both pointed at me. Now, it had never entered my mind, truly, that I would give a sermon. But I said, you guys know a lot more than I do. I know John 3:16. I mean, that's about it. And so they said, no, you got to do it, Bill. So I delivered a sermon through an interpreter. It always helps. I delivered this sermon. I talked about Middle America and the problems of America and all these kinds of things. And I quoted a few verses. And then he said, now sing a hymn of invitation. And so I sang a hymn of invitation. And then the whole group started moving toward us. I said, what are they doing? I've heard stories. I've read things in books. He said, they want to accept Christ. I said, all of them? He said, yeah, all of them. He said, lead them in prayer. So I led them in prayer. And it was there on that open field in 1968 that it just struck me that God had just used Bill Hull. Because kids used to go around when I was in junior high and I flunked the 7th grade, and they would say, duh. You know, junior high kids are so nice. But, and it struck me so powerfully, I've never gotten over it. And I've never doubted it since that day. That God used me. And that nourishes a person's soul. Now Moses has this. Moses not only has this, but he has other tools that God gave him. Like the one about where you stick your hand in here, and you pull it out, and it's leprous, and you put it back in, and it comes out and it's healed. That's a good tool to have. Look at this! Give me trouble? Look at this! Then he had the one where you take water out of the river, and it becomes blood. That's also very effective. And then he's got that staff. I mean, he's got 3 really good things going for him here. And so it's time for him, obviously by this time, none of us would be resistant. But then again, Moses says, I don't have the right gifts. This is verse 10. And Moses pleaded with God. Oh Lord, I'm not very good with words. I never have been, and I'm not now. Even though you have spoken to me, I get tongue-tied, and my words get tangled. When I gave my first sermon, I was not a seasoned speaker by any means. In fact, I had a talent for coining words, making up words that didn't exist. Satisfaction. I've been known to say, let the bed carry the bed. One slew felt. And I was a horrible speller. And could not pronounce lots and lots of words. Some kind of speech impediment. And so I discovered something. This little lady named Jane, who is now my wife, she can spell anything. She can pronounce anything. And she has discipled me for the last 44 years, where I actually can be understood most of the time. When I first started preaching, I had a little country church, a little United Methodist church. They didn't want me to stay at the United Methodist Church. They kicked me out. But I had a little church, the Mount Pisgah United Methodist Church, 45 tobacco farms. And it was a different world. It was one of those student pastors, $25 a week. But I was earnest. And I would write out my sermons, and I'd put them on cards, and I'd stand in our apartment on the ironing board. I'd stand there with my notes on the ironing board, and Jane would sit across the room, and she was there, and I would give the sermon. But she kept bursting out with laughter so often. Trying to make something good poignant. She'd go, so I made her turn around and face the wall. Preach, and I could see her shoulders going up and down. But I think it's just God's sense of humor. When I went back to my high school, and a lot of my friends became very wealthy and important people in Indiana. And so we met at the top of the Hilton Hotel downtown Indianapolis with one of my old buddies from high school who owned the hotel. So he says, Bill, and he called together about 20 of our friends, basketball players and athletes and friends. And he said, Bill, the reason I called everybody here today is we have to know what happened to you. I told him the whole story. And I think it's God's sense of humor that I have made my life using words, writing them, publishing, speaking, teaching all over the world, many times over. This is hilarious. And you see, that's the kind of hilarity that God wants out of our lives. And so, this question, what is that you have in your hand? What is it that's in your hand? What is it that represents who you are, your competency, and what you do, and how people think of you and identify with you? And then it becomes supernatural when God says, throw it down, which is another way of saying, let me take it. Okay? And it becomes something different. It becomes alive. It becomes powerful. It becomes a tool in his hands. And sometimes we want to run from that, just like Moses. But there's something standing in the way. It could be the very last thing that Moses says. I don't want to do it. Verse 13. Lord, please send anyone else. Please. Then the Lord became angry with Moses. You know, one of the weaknesses, I think, of our theology oftentimes is we forget that God is a person who gets angry with us. You know, there's not two gods. Like this God of the Old Testament, who's kind of wild, crazy, and unpredictable, and watch out. And then this wonderful Jesus in the New Testament. It's the same God. And it doesn't mean that he's condemning us. It just means that God feels what we feel. He feels what's going on in this world. And sometimes he gets angry. But it's interesting. He collects himself, if I may say it that way, quickly. He said, what about your brother Aaron, the Levite? I know he speaks well. And look, he's on his way to meet you now. He'll be delighted to see you. Talk to him. And put the words in his mouth, and I will be with both of you as you speak, and I will instruct you both in what you do. Aaron will be your spokesman to the people. He will be your mouthpiece, and you will stand in the place of God for him, telling him what to say. And take your shepherd's staff with you. Don't forget it. And use it to perform the miraculous signs I have shown you. That's our God. Now, I can't fill in the blank for you tonight. You know what God is asking you to do. If you don't know what he's asking you to do, ask him. Spend this time, this weekend, asking that question. What is it, God, that you've put in my hand? What do you want me to do with it? How do you want to use it? Now, I'll elaborate on this. But what is it? Because you see, nobody, no matter how intelligent or unintelligent or perceptive or insightful a speaker or your friends are, there is no substitute for asking God himself. Trusting that he'll answer you. And then, if I don't want to do it, Lord, why? Why don't I want to do it? Because he wants to transform you. And he wants to take that, he took that simple stick of wood. Something that was ordinary. And he made it extraordinary. He took something that was natural and he made it supernatural. See, God isn't asking you to be somebody else. He just wants to transform what you are. And so I'm going to pray with you and for you this weekend. Because, you see, you've done a courageous thing. You may not have thought of it as courageous, but you came here. And you carved out this time. And you have put yourself in the hot seat. You are in the line of fire to hear God. And so I want to pray with you right now. Lord, please hear our heart tonight. I thank you that those years ago that you spoke to me and you showed it to me. You answered my prayer. And here I am. And I ask for every man here that we won't leave here without asking this question. Lord, what have you put in my hand and what does you want me to do? If I don't want to do it, why not? That this weekend we will devote ourselves to having that answer. Or have an answer we already have confirmed in us. And we thank you because we love you. We know you're present here. We invite you in and ask you to wander among us. And that we'll be men of humility because that is your natural habitat. That's where you love to be. And we ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.